Good evening, everyone. The doomsday clock has ticked one more time, and we're back with an impromptu DF Direct to talk about the latest acquisition in this industry. Yes, Microsoft has bought Activision Blizzard, King, I believe. But I'm not here alone to talk about this monumental news. I am joined, of course, by the newsman himself, Alex Battaglia.
Hey there, Audi. This is incredible news. Literally, it's just unbelievable. I almost fell out of my chair when I read it. I think you have as well too, right?
I was sitting on the proper chair when this news came. Speaking of which, the proper man to be here with us to discuss this is John Linneman.
Yes, it is time. This is why we have a show like DF Direct now, so we can actually talk about this stuff as it happens. And this is big crazy news. This is like classic 90s Microsoft kind of kicking down the door, like buying up companies. They're back, baby. That's kind of the best way to describe it. So
yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit about the 90s during this little talk because there are some similarities. But yes, let's get into the news. And just to note, the news is real, but this episode is not canon.
Yes.
So we are not actually appearing together in the video yet. So as mentioned, Microsoft announced kind of out of the blue that they have acquired Activision Blizzard. I don't think any of us saw this coming. I don't think the industry has seen this coming. And there's a lot of things to talk about here. I think, though, let's start with just kind of, we've seen so many acquisitions recently in the industry. It's not the first time this has happened for video gaming or for entertainment in general. But John, what's your kind of thoughts when you just see this kind of deal come to place?
Disney? No, it's, so I'm of two minds on this one. So I'm not a big fan of all these acquisitions happening in the industry because it's just consolidation. It's a little bit too much. But in this case, this is actually one of those exceptions where I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe something good can come of this, because Activision itself has become sort of a cesspool in recent years. And not only, aside from their awful internal issues, they've also just like doubled down on just the most standard BS, if you pardon my French there, where it's literally like, okay, all studios, Call of Duty. That kind of mentality where they have all this rich history of games available, but they've chosen to double down on very specific IP, pulling all their talent into that. And I'm not a fan. Like, I loved the recent Tony Hawk remaster, and their reward for that amazing work was, now you go work in the Call of Duty mines. So even though, like I said, I'm not a big fan of all these acquisitions from any side, doesn't matter who's the buyer. In this case, there is actually a chance that Microsoft could do some good here and potentially sort of salvage the studios or, the company as a whole.
Yeah, I'm going to hear at John's point of view, very similar to that, where I don't think the consolidation for the industry is necessarily a good thing because, if you do look at the Disney thing that's happened and just what generally happens with IPs and sometimes also with studios, there can be some very negative things that happen as a result of that historically. Generally in terms of like price and where things are available to be purchased and played, that can have negative repercussions that we'll talk about later on. From the PC perspective, this kind of like John was saying, for enriching maybe Activision's portfolio and getting rid of the cesspool of internal problems that is over there at Activision Blizzard. For PC, this could also actually kind of mean positive things because currently a lot of PC players are not at all happy with what Blizzard has been putting out over the last couple of years, whether what they've done with WoW, Warcraft 3, Reforged, almost anything Blizzard. A lot of people are very unhappy with that. The fact that it is all on their own launcher. This could actually see a diversification of Blizzard's lineup to be, releasing now on Steam. You could have Blizzard shakeups occurring where they actually return to their classic franchises like StarCraft. This could mean a whole lot of things because it's going to mean a general change in direction for the company. And like John, I do not like playing Call of Duty games. Like, I'm really sorry for all those in the audience who do. And if this for any reason meant that all these many studios that we'll talk about very soon are going to work on something that isn't Call of Duty, I'd actually be very for that. So
I'm of two minds, kind of similar to you. Activision isn't really a company that I'm like following deeply. My first thoughts, of course, comes down to the fact that the leadership at Activision is toxic and needs to go. And I hope and think that Microsoft would be smart to do so.
yeah.
So hopefully a better Blizzard Activision can come from this. But in general, I'm not very positive towards acquisitions in entertainment in general. It's not just a recent thing with Disney and whatnot, but monopolistic industries aren't good for competition. They usually come with kind of like a holdover space where things look okay, but then there is a change in atmosphere, there is a change in method, there is a change in just kind of overall direction that comes with it. And one studio to another will not always fit with this change. And this is not a new thing for the video games industry, and I think we're a little bit dormant as consumers when we look at this and just kind of say, well, my side is now getting these games. For a competition standpoint, it is almost never positive. But during the 90s, as John so casually brought us back to during the introduction, during the 90s here in Europe, there was a big consolidation of studios into Infogrames, and that was one of the largest of its era. And it immediately swallowed and killed European gaming development. And it was very bad, and and now we're seeing the reverse. I think for AAA development, this is a very worrying situation where everything is going into these families, as they call it, because that's what they call acquisitions now. They're becoming part of the families. And there just isn't enough space and there isn't enough time for all this talent, all this material, all these IPs to coexist within one brand, one family. So I don't think we should celebrate acquisitions as much as we do, though I do think people in general are becoming a little bit more aware of it thanks to Disney, and kind of seeing what's happening there, because everything has to be streaming these days, everything has to be kind of available there and only there. So that's my kind of opinion off the top of my head with acquisitions, is that history will tell you that this never really leads to more, it actually leads to less, because there just isn't enough space for this type of development to happen within one single entity. But that's my opinion there. For the PC and such, as you mentioned, I think we will see a change in terms of how Activision games are brought to consumers now, and that might be kind of the saving grace of this deal.
Yeah, and you know what? Actually, this maybe the next thing we should really talk about is the potential for some of these properties essentially becoming exclusive to PC and Xbox, right? Like, I assume that's kind of the driving force behind this. And in this case, Activision's weird because they have such a vast selection of available IP, but
well, John, you should remember that Activision themselves acquired half the industry before them.
Yeah.
Microsoft. So I mean, this is an acquisition of a company that acquires.
I mean, so if you actually look at the list, though, I mean, most of the companies they acquired were ones that had been essentially working for them, like almost exclusively, for a long time already. So it kind of made sense. It's just that now they've kind of limited their scope in terms of what they develop. So I think Call of Duty is the big one, right? Call of Duty lost players like us, I think. But there's two parts to it. One, the technology behind it. There is value there, although it is, again, pretty much just limited to just Call of Duty. But secondly, then there's the fact that it still does actually sell pretty well. So it could have an interesting impact on the market in that sense, where, okay, now Call of Duty's no longer on PlayStation. What does that mean? I mean, what do you guys think?
First, let's talk about just availability then, because Call of Duty is the one, I think, the IP that's going to have the most eyes on it. There's tons of others we could talk
Well,
about.
maybe Blizzard stuff might be up there as well, but
Yes, but I mean, from an Activision standpoint, at least, Call of Duty, and from a mainstream appeal, because we talked about this before recording. So the luster has kind of gone from Call of Duty towards, traditional gamers like us, I suppose. Like, we're not excited for it, other than sometimes seeing a glimpse of new technology. But like I was telling you, is that like Call of Duty is like the FIFA of competitive shooters. It's just kind of like it's the impulse buy that the mainstream audiences pick up. So it's not about so much about the hype machine or anything. It's just the brand value. And for what I think, and again, this comes down to acquisitions in general, the large ones, is that there is always this kind of grace period where it's like, don't worry, it will still be available. The 1 star in development will still come out on the announced platforms, and everyone should be happy with this celebration. And then, we do yub nub all around. But the thing about it is that, of course, investors and boards will want their returns on this eventually, and as such, that tap will close. There's no doubt about that. And that's where kind of, when we talk about like AAA development and stuff, that's where it kind of gets a little bit iffy when suddenly this brand now is locked to one single console, because availability of the console itself is not always great in every country and things like this. So I'm undecided whether or not I think this is good or not. Alex?
A couple of things probably here. I do agree with you that there would, in the eventuality of this deal, 100% closing and it not having any sort of, I don't know how to say, fair business practice problems of monopolization that are stopped by governments. Then there would be a transitory period, much like we're going to see with Bethesda games, where they eventually only start coming out on Xbox and PC. As a PC player, I actually don't care that much, but in terms of the health of the industry, I think it's not the best of things to occur. But at the same time, not all of these IPs are going to be created equal. So I think Call of Duty would be one that Microsoft would say, yeah, we really want this only to be on Xbox. That's the whole point of doing this. But other IPs here, for example, like Diablo, or I don't know, any of the Warcraft, StarCraft IP, things like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero. I don't necessarily see if that ever comes out, I don't know. But I don't necessarily see these as things that always need to only be attached to the Xbox IP necessarily, because Microsoft has acquired before in the past and realize that the IP is bigger than their own systems itself, like Minecraft, where that still comes out and gets updated on other platforms. So this could be a diverse level of exclusivity, where some IPs are exclusive and others are not. I could actually see that rather realistically occurring.
Yeah, I mean, anything that has kind of like a license value, like Tony Hawk, I don't think that we will see outside of Xbox, though. I think it just has too much brand value and adds too much kind of grandeur to the Xbox name.
Well, the question is, though,
benefit them.
Do you think Microsoft brings that back again? Because they did the Tony Hawk remaster, and then they promptly said, no, Call of Duty. And they shut it down.
I absolutely think that Microsoft will be interested in bringing back something like Tony Hawk.
I think they would, yeah, too.
Yeah. We have a saying at DF: as long as Snoop Dogg plays it, they'll do it. So, and I think he still will play with Tony Hawk. But I think that's kind of the interesting thing when we talk about IPs, though, is kind of Activision has been sitting on so many IPs. We talk about Call of Duty, but as Alex mentions here, there's many others, and some have gone dormant, like Tony Hawk. So I definitely see something like Crash, for example, which came back recently with 4, was it?
Yeah.
Which was on all consoles, obviously. And I could see that still kind of having some value on, say, a Nintendo Switch, because like Super Lucky Tail was another one that debuted on Xbox and then would eventually come out, because just that kind of IP suits itself well. And Microsoft is not. They're interesting because they're a company that aren't against seeing the value of doing cross-platform. So that's why this acquisition is kind of interesting overall. But I do think definitely the heavy hitters, it's going to be locked. And it's going to be locked soon.
Yeah, like there's no way they're going to bring like Cabela's Dangerous Hunts or Hunting Expeditions back to PlayStation after this.
That's a good point, John.
I mean, just
that's
laying down
really
the
the
facts.
death of an industry, isn't it? I mean, where can I catch my bass if not on my Nintendo Switch?
But so the big thing here, though, I guess, is so thinking again about it from a technology perspective. I'm trying to consider the studios that are actually pushing technology forward, and I feel like Call of Duty is the one franchise where we actually see that, like actual technical developments, and most of the games Activision does produce tend to utilize things such as Unreal Engine, for instance. There's not a lot of cutting edge development going on, this is very different from, say, Bethesda, right? Because Bethesda, those studios were using all different types of technology, and most notably, they had access to id Software, right? With the id Tech engine, which is phenomenal. Call of Duty's technology is also very impressive, but I think it's like the only one. And they only seem to use it in Call of Duty. So I don't necessarily think that this would represent any sort of great loss for the competition, so to speak. And even in like if you look at Blizzard as well, like Blizzard is not pushing technological boundaries, and they have their own in-house tech as well.
Yeah, I guess from the tech perspective, like you've got Call of Duty has two engines running it, the IW 2019 engine, as well as whatever Treyarch does, which is different. And that's something that people don't always realize because they look so similar. But you've got those two different things. But the Call of Duty juggernaut, it does actually have some industry sway because the people pushing tech behind it, there are actually really important, and they're developing a lot of new technology all the time and really a lot of best practices. It could lead to another level of technology sharing within the Microsoft group itself, which would be good for those games coming out on Microsoft platforms, but other than that, I'm actually not seeing a large technological wave of impact from this at all.
Now that you mention it, Alex, this is actually one slight concern, is that now they're essentially amassing all this expertise in all these different areas, right? But they've already had studios internally that specialize in Unreal Engine, like the Coalition, right? Then you have the id Tech stuff. Now you have Call of Duty. Do you still think there's space for all of these? Or are they going to start to consolidate into something? Like, what does this mean for all those engineers that are in these specific bubbles doing their thing, and now they're all thrown into this singular company?
If the most recent acquisition of Bethesda is any indication, is so far things have not changed there. All the respective different groups are all using their own tech if they want to. There's no sort of EA, everyone has to use Frostbite mandate going out there. So I do actually see a lot of the tech staying in place, and I don't, because this is they've gotten so good at all these different companies, especially on the Activision side, have gotten so good at producing titles so rapidly in their own way with their own structures, toxic structures though. So I guess that's something that's a problem that I don't actually see a huge tech impact for any of this, other than the fact that it could lead to greater strives to push DirectX forward in better directions, because we've already seen issues with DirectX as this generation started.
I'd also like to see them essentially give the Call of Duty development studios more time. I know they're on this 3 studios cycle, but it does kind of feel like Call of Duty's, it has to be annual at this point. And I do think that that's created problems for the franchise. And I think it is not beyond saving in that regard. And perhaps Microsoft, given their much larger portfolio, can actually say, we don't need a Call of Duty this year. Do something special, and then we release it. So that could actually have a benefit for that series.
It's kind of hard to say because Microsoft has thus far been hands off. But that doesn't mean, again, acquisitions they're usually cyclical like this, and it does take a while before the major changes happen, generally from a board directive or something like this. But Microsoft does have the money to actually allow some freedom for these studios. So I don't know. It's hard for me to say on a tech perspective whether or not it affects them. I do think of it, it does narrow a little bit of the playing field overall, and we're talking a lot about Call of Duty. We're talking a lot about Blizzard, but there's so many studios within Activision. I do wonder if they keep all them separate or if they clean up house and start consolidating them into like
Larger
you know,
groups.
yeah, Activision South and Activision North and that kind of
That's a good point.
structure.
I mean, they're all basically support studios now for Call of Duty, right? Like that's what's happened. And it could go two ways where they can consolidate, like you're saying, which would be bad, I think, actually. Or, and I would love this is almost wishful thinking, they could essentially grant them their freedom. Like, I would love for something like Raven Software to be reborn as its own thing, making its own games again. I mean, that would be awesome. Not to say that, the people working there are the same that they were in the past, but I'm sure they would love to get out from under the Call of Duty shadow and build something again. And that would be best case, I think, for me.
I think there is a slight little bit of precedent here for that maybe being a possibility, because this, like you're saying though, Audi, like this is just the immediate period after acquisition with something like Bethesda. We still have yet to see what happens in 5 years from now, which is really important because acquisitions first look happy in the first 3 years. First game comes out and then something, obviously large changes occur. But with the Bethesda acquisition, we still see all these. We've already seen like things like I think the name of the game is Redfall. We've seen and a number of other actual separate IPs that were very much so like what these studios wanted to essentially start creating. We have Ninja Theory also now producing 2 games, right? And they're very much so their pet projects, very much so Ninja Theory's kind of styles of game. That we see there. It's not like they're put on the next Gears of War title or something like that yet. Obviously, that is still early in the acquisition times for these companies. Who knows what will happen in the future? But those are all positive things to point that this could be a possibility for this Activision Blizzard takeover with a lot of these companies like Toys for Bob, Raven, Demonware, any of them, Beanox, but that's more of a sports studio anyway. But one thing also that I think pushes in that direction is the Netflix model, which Game Pass, we're going to have to talk about Game Pass in a second here, where the Netflix model, if you've gone on Netflix, or I would say if you look at Amazon Productions or something like that, or even Apple Productions, they have their really headlining, everyone watches this thing, on Netflix. It's like that new movie with The Rock or whatever, but they also subsidize smaller art house indie projects that are not nearly as popular. So there, with these subscription models, the amount of money and revenue that is brought in, it's enough to cover the big AAA, but also enough surplus on the side to finance smaller, more passion-style projects from smaller developments. That's how Netflix works usually.
Yeah. Well, hopefully then it's not exactly like Netflix in the sense that they'll release complete games, because Netflix does have a really nasty habit of canceling things. Even stuff that people tend to like, they'll like run a season and say, you know what, we're done, and get out. And that sucks. That's a real unfortunate part of that business.
So you mentioned though, Alex, that Game Pass is kind of a factor here too. And how many Games Passes do you think comes with this Activision acquisition?
Well, I'm starting to think maybe Game Pass, if it gets more expensive as a result of this, that would be interesting. But maybe Game Pass will actually start needing tiers because, surely it can't keep the same price while also offering day and date games from all of these places.
Historically, this is what happens, though. Probably not tiers, but I do think that price increases will come at a bi-yearly rate with games. We're still, it's a new console, it's a relatively new offer from the Microsoft side of things, so I do think that we're still in the kind of like honeymoon period with Game Pass.
Yeah. And
with stuff like this, you definitely are going to see some increases, probably a little bit sooner than you think. But it does definitely allow, though, for a lot of these IPs to come to Game Pass, which is much like the Bethesda thing, it's kind of a game changer for Microsoft.
My thoughts on these services. I'm not a big fan personally, but that's just because, I'm more into actually owning stuff as opposed to just, but I know this stuff's popular, but at least in the case of Activision, they were really bad in terms of this already, like in terms of ownership. They wouldn't ship complete physical games. They were locking games behind DRM, including Diablo 2 remastered, which is like a console game that has a 30-day check-in. So actually Activision's like terrible for this stuff. So in that regard, anything is an improvement over that, to be honest.
Well,
So
Microsoft the Xbox Series, I think, has a bit of a physical issue at the moment.
Oh, it absolutely
Anyway.
does, but it
I
doesn't
don't know
change.
if it will improve, but
It doesn't
I should
change
say, It is
anything.
probably better, regardless of what happens. It probably
Exactly.
is better than what we had.
For Activision stuff, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned earlier that like Activision Call of Duty stuff, that's like the ultimate impulse title, right? And then when you have something like Game Pass, if you can, put that exclusively on there eventually, I mean, that's the ultimate impulse.
It is,
isn't it?
really.
It's just kind of, you don't have to do anything anymore.
You always get your Call of Duty no matter what. It's there.
You just need to fill your fridge with Pepsi and play Call of Duty. So I definitely see why Microsoft, and another thing we haven't even touched on is, why is Microsoft doing this now? We kind of touched on it in the sense that I think recent events with that terrible company, led to the fact that their value dropped to a point, and also the board of directors probably were open to that change.
Oh, I'm sure Microsoft saw they could smell the blood in the water.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now is the perfect time to strike. They were probably right. So
Struck they did, because I mean, this must have happened fairly quickly, based on the fact that I don't think anyone
had any
saw
clue
it
about this.
coming.
No.
Yeah, this was. The reason why we're a little bit kind of at loss of words over this is just that we haven't even been able to kind of sit down, read about this, talk to people.
it's
We
kind
know.
of shocking. Yeah.
Well, there's some
Yeah.
there is some historical precedent of what can happen here, because obviously we talked at the beginning of here, and you just mentioned it. Really toxic company, a lot of issues, like harassment claims, the way QA has been, for example, supported and fired at a variety of these companies when titles ship, or not given wage increases when promised. And there's also the current walkout that is occurring, the strike that is occurring, and the fact that in spite of all these issues, the management is still in place. With the ZeniMax takeover, I think the ZeniMax board was dissolved after the takeover. So it would not be so surprising to see something here as well too, which would be a positive of all of this as well.
I think this is something that's important to note for people who aren't too experienced with the industry, is that when you do any acquisition, big or large, is that there is a transition period that needs to take place. There is a handover that needs to happen. So it's not just on the dime that you acquire something that you dissolve what was there. There is a transition period in which that board has to actually transition the materials and the leadership that they hold on to the new team. So I haven't read what the reactions are regarding this as of this recording, but if changes haven't happened yet, I think this has to do with transitions rather than just Microsoft's intentions, because as you say, Alex, I think that would be the number one thing they really need to look at before the game's even. It's just kind of like, hey, we've acquired basically the hottest potato in the industry. You can't just hold on to it with its current situation.
Yeah.
That would be impossible. It would tank a lot of the goodwill that Microsoft has, for good reason.
There's reports coming out that suggest that Bobby Kotick will only essentially remain in charge through the acquisition period, and then it shifts over to Phil under his,
good old
Stewart,
Philly.
good old Philly.
So exactly. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah, hopefully. I mean, the thing is though, is Bobby Kotick, he's been in this so long, like he's fine. And he's
You mean like
real,
repercussions?
there will be no comeuppance for him. He's just going to be able to walk away with a ton of money and and that big Bobby Kotick smile, and maybe fund Moneyball too. I don't know.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But
he will be on a yacht somewhere.
no,
for the rest of his life.
honestly, looking at this, the weirdest thing about acquisitions from any of these companies doing it is that it's the way the fans react, almost like their favorite companies are like football teams. You know, it's like it's a very strange culture we're in right now. To see that, and I assume that's probably going to be happening here.
Again, I mean, we're recording this, 15 minutes after the news came out, just to put you into proper context here of when we're talking about it. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like we talked about at the beginning again. When you play these teams and say like, well, now my team is getting such and such, you shouldn't just celebrate that willy-nilly, because competition is a real thing, and things blossom from good competition. From a monopoly, the consumer is always the ones that suffer from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do hope that people, I understand they won't, and it's completely nonsense to be positive here and optimistic, but I would hope that people still have a little bit of a hesitancy of just accepting like, oh, Call of Duty is on the console that I bought this time around, therefore I win. It's like there's really no such thing. I mean, if you're silly enough to take sides, then I guess you're silly enough to think that way.
Just kind of more wishes and desires. I would ask you, Audi, too, what do you wish to come of this regarding the IPs, regarding the exclusivity, regarding anything?
Pitfall to Mayan Adventure HD.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't want it in HD because I don't think...
Oh, they'd make it up.
With the original animation assets?
If they had
Crazy boy.
That'd be really good looking, maybe, actually.
I don't think they have that.
Okay.
Because they were all converted to...
Sure, someone has it in a garage somewhere.
It was all converted to pixel art from like pencil sketches and such. So it's not, I don't think there's like original frames of animation in high resolution around for that.
You don't
stuff.
think the animation cells are still out there?
Not based. I mean, not based on talking with.
That's right.
You remember I did that interview, so
you did that interview, which right there you have a link to it.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
But yeah, great interview actually about the creation of Pitfall Mine.
He did have some good stories about Bobby Kotick in there. Like how, like when they were first at like a CES showing off the game, and there was a booth across the way that was too loud, and Bobby comes over with like his investor squad, like a mob boss, and they basically ask, "Is there a problem here?" And it's like, "Oh, it's too loud over there." And like Bobby kind of like snaps his fingers and sends somebody over there, and then the volume went down the rest of the show. And you just kind of got this impression that he operated in this very interesting way. No, it was Bobby, and actually the guy that helped Bobby fund Activision in the first place, which was like some casino tycoon. I don't know, the story, there's radical stuff in there, but I agree though. I love Pitfall to Mayan Adventure. 90s Activision was actually amazing. The MechWarrior 2, Interstate 76, all the stuff they were doing on the PC was really, really cool. They were actually doing awesome business back then, and I felt like that was kind of the golden years. And then Tony Hawk was big for a while, but it does feel to me that once Call of Duty hit, along with Guitar Hero, it was like the beginning of the end for like creativity within Activision, and things just kind of became cyclical and immediately went downhill in that regard. But it is interesting to look at the actual image that Xbox put out. They feature 6 games: Overwatch, Diablo, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Candy Crush, and StarCraft. And I feel like an image
of StarCraft is interesting, though.
That's an interesting image because it says a lot about what they're thinking about as far as what has value within Activision Blizzard. And it's heavily Blizzard.
Yeah, and that's kind of, we haven't talked much about Blizzard because they're kind of like a wild card in this acquisition for me, because I already felt like they were operating so differently from the main Activision in terms of releases as it was. So I don't really know how much of a change there will be at Blizzard in terms of their output. I think that will continue very much as normal just because of the nature of their games and where they fit along the industry. But I would love still, Blizzard also back in the 90s were an amazing company with a pretty diverse output, like Blackthorn and Lost Vikings and these other things than just Warcraft. And even Warcraft itself, I would love to see that brought back to a brand that can hold some different types of adventures. I mean, there was even Warcraft Adventures that never came out.
Yeah,
with
that's
Animation
pretty
Magic
important.
working on it.
Yeah.
Animation Magic.
From Cella CDI fame. But I would love to kind of see that sort of structure come back where these companies, like you mentioned earlier, Alex, that like these pet projects could come back. I don't think that's realistic, but when you're asking me just kind of what I hope, that I want the smaller games to come back, the double A's. I want that to kind of come back. And because we have the indies, and the indies is an incredible place of creativity. But sometimes it's also kind of fun to see a bigger company take risks with the actual budgets that they have and create something. Kind of like when Konami brought out games back in the day. They always kind of had like these AA titles that were quite interesting on PS2 and whatnot.
I feel like those days are just never truly coming back. It's more like indies are getting bigger and rising to fill that space. But like one of the issues I have in general with modern games is we're getting to the point where a lot of them feel homogenized somewhat. And I understand this to a degree. Like there's like best practices, like this is the way an analog stick should feel. This is the way these types of movement situations should feel. This is the way you should do maps, This is the way you should guide players. It feels like all these big AAA games have all kind of adopted a lot of the same rules. And as a result, you just end up with games that all feel like they're drawing from the same pool in a way that was not the case in the past. And it's kind of killing a lot of, I don't know, there's something that's really missing lately. And this is an industry wide problem now. And it applies equally to these, but I feel like Activision was really driving this kind of stuff for a while, and Ubisoft.
Yeah.
Yes. I think what you're missing is kind of a voice, a personality to what's being put out, because it feels very manufactured rather than coming from.
Like, just for all its flaws, games like Cyberpunk and of course The Witcher 3, which was much better well received. That's one of the reasons I always like CD Projekt Red, is that even though they were doing kind of mainstream stuff, it still felt like it was coming from a different place. You know what I mean? And they didn't just adhere to those best practices necessarily. Sometimes it didn't work out, sometimes it did, but the games felt unique in a way that we don't often see these days. So I don't know.
And I think that's why people were so excited for Cyberpunk as well, from all the E3s that we went to and stuff. Like, people were excited for it because it seemed to actually say something different. And I think that's, again, what you're missing is just kind of like a clear voice in these massively manufactured beasts of games that we're getting.
But I will say, Microsoft has done a fairly good job of, it feels like they haven't pushed too far in that direction, and we're still getting stuff that feels a little bit unique, perhaps. What they're allowing Ninja Theory to do still, for instance, is interesting. Those games do feel different. They're sort of elevating them. Psychonauts 2 came out. Of course, that was not completely under the Microsoft umbrella during development, but it did feel unique. And I am happy that they're essentially allowing these games to sort of thrive within their ecosystem, when I feel like bigger companies, standalone publishers, have been less and less likely to do this. So it could actually work out in that regard, and maybe we'll see the return of some more interesting Activision ideas. Maybe. I hope.
Not to glorify people in the industry, because they're all businessmen and it all comes down to business, but I do think that Uncle Phil has kind of like a good view of what games are and what gamers want. When I say gamers, I just mean general, like video game players, not like the type of person. But I think he has a pretty keen eye and a healthy outlook on what games can provide to people in general and culture. So I enjoy his output, and he's been working out for a long time. I mean, his messaging hasn't really changed since at least, the first times I've ever spoken to him many years back. I mean, it's a good thing he's building there, and I think that helps Microsoft steer the ship for now into a better place. It just remains to be seen if that holds, or if, there will, of course, come a day where the Bethesda deal, the Activision deal, has to make its money back, and with interest, so to speak. And that's where it gets icky.
I think one thing I wonder with like some of all these side studios and stuff is I think they'll continue to build this internal team around this, but you'll have a subset of people that move on and maybe start their own studios. I think Embark is a good example of this over at EA, because you had all these Frostbite guys, these guys at DICE doing this stuff for years, and they all kind of just got up, left, formed their own studio. Now they're doing their own thing, right? And I feel like if something's not working for one of these studios or certain creators, that type of thing might happen from it. So, you know, we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is so much up in the air. This was just kind of our initial thoughts. And I think that's a good place to cap it off, because, I mean, until this comes into fruition, until things happen, we don't really know, right? But we're cautiously optimistic on some things, I'd say, and quite pessimistic overall to consolidation throughout entertainment. This is not just a video game thing, but right now, with all the streaming services and stuff, we're seeing all this acquisition, and that comes with a huge loss of talent, knowledge, and whatnot, because there just isn't enough space. And consumers beware. Don't just celebrate this. Have some opinions. That's kind of where we lay at the moment.
Agreed. I think so.
As you're seeing this now, of course, you can like and subscribe, and I think you will be seeing all three of us on Monday with our DF Direct. If you're on the Patreon, though, you will see us in the weekend, because the weekend starts on Saturday.
Oh my goodness.
As
usually
we put it out early. Usually. Well, always, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever missed a Saturday.
Audi's good at that.
So, yes, I work weekends. But, of course, you can join us on Patreon. You can like and subscribe on YouTube, all that good stuff. You can follow us on Twitter and see our musings on the industry and how much John has been struggling with his computer lately. And it's all riveting stuff and very exciting.
Plus complaining about DRM and Diablo 2 on consoles. So this is, you know, that was just yesterday.
More on that this week on DF Direct. But until then, gentlemen, I bid you adieu.